So one of the things Maynard always told me when I would meet with him was what he wanted to achieve. And it wasn't money, it wasn't fame, it wasn't a title. He said to me that when he was retired, which is going to be a long time from now, but when he was retired and he was sitting on a park bench, if someone he had ever worked with walked by and they saw him, that they would want to stop and say hello and chat with him. And so Maynard, my question is, why is that the North Star?
For me, it's pretty easy. First, I was always just trying to explain to people that it's all about integrity and building relationships and building trust. A lot of times when you're at the top of a company, people are very deferential to you and they think your jokes are funny when they're really not. And they really just need budget dollars from you or a promotion. And so I was always trying to use that example to say, look, I won't be able to promote you. I won't be able to give you dollars for your budget. Will you still want to hang with me? And part of that hanging was that we want to have built things that were incredible, because it's nice that you have acquaintances, but what matters is that you're doing something valuable. And so you've done something together and it was fun. And secondly, they still like you, because everybody in this room can think about the people they work with, and in a second, you know, would you want to hang with them? Or, well, I'll just kind of walk by and hope they don't see me. And so all of us need to work harder to continue to be people that are park bench worthy.
Yep.
So that's what I was trying to do.
And how do you think leadership, the landscape for leadership, has changed in the past, let's say 20 years, right? Because the pace of change from 99 to 2019, probably the most incredible 20 years we've seen.
Oh my gosh. I think the next 20 will be even more incredible.
Yeah.
I think people are looking for inspiration now, and they're looking to have a voice way more.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even have, in 1999, there was no social media.
Yep.
And they want collaboration. They don't want it, the early days, it was all command and control, right? And when you're the boss, that feels pretty good. And when you're the employee, that doesn't feel as good. And one of the things we had to learn was how to inspire people and get folks to do the things they could do without being told, right? If you remember, there were all those times that Meg and I made a lot of decisions in the early days, and that felt fun, and there was a lot of pushback about, hey, we're ready. And the more we gave, the better it was. Right?
So what advice, everyone here is running a company or will be running a company or has run a company, what advice would you give to startup founders today in terms of how to build their companies?
That's more than an hour session, but I would.
It's true.
I would say the first thing is it's all about the talent and the values you have, and that your people, when you become a leader, your life changes radically, and the people who work for you's life will be impacted in ways you won't imagine, because you could tell a joke, you could be sarcastic when you were an individual contributor, but that person might have laughed or might have been annoyed, but they didn't think they were going to lose their jobs. And when you're their boss and you make a joke or you say something, they go home and they tell their spouse and they wonder whether they have a job anymore. So you have an obligation that's much higher than you think for their livelihood and for their career and making sure that they can achieve their destiny. So it's a much bigger weight than you may think.
Yeah.
It's actually fun and everything, but you should never underestimate your impact on folks and what you say and what you do. I remember there were times at eBay when I didn't, like there were times at eBay that I'm sure I was off the reservation on different things.
We won't talk about those today.
I tried to behave most times, but I could be walking down the hall, and if I'd one smiling, somebody's like, Maynard's upset about something. I'm like, no, I was just thinking of something and trying to get to my next meeting or wondering what I was going to do after work or something. But, people try to read every signal you've got. And so make sure, and people are your best asset and your best ally, and you should ask them to help you more, and you need to make sure that you ask more of them. I love hearing Shri say that I pushed her. I think that was a very collaborative exercise, but people don't, people want to do more, and you should be asking them to do more. And sometimes we think, well, this won't be fair, or maybe that's going to be too hard. And I always just didn't believe that. I was like, okay, I have a problem. Can you help me solve it?
Right.
Would you like to help me solve it? And people did amazing things.
How do you, especially at fast-moving startups where there's so much going on, but at the same time, when your leadership has such an impact on everybody, how do you grow? And how do you keep yourself open to input? And how are you that person where people feel comfortable giving you key input that could make you more successful?
Well, I think that last piece is the very first one. How much input are you getting every day? Because if you're not getting a lot of input, you're probably not as approachable as you need to be. And I think when you're a leader, that doesn't mean you're done. You have to keep learning and growing and getting better and better. I mean, if you're running a company of 10 people, that's cool, but hopefully you'll be 100 or 500 or 10,000. I'm at Salesforce now, and I think when I joined the board 14 years ago, we were 300 people, and we're going to be 40,000 at the end of the year. And I can promise you that how you had to manage at a couple hundred is way different than at 40,000. Same, it's true all along the journey. And so I think you have to be constantly trying to grow and learn and listen and watch. And you can feel in your audiences whether people are resonating with you or you're losing them or how you communicate. And I would also say, don't be afraid. So many times when you're early as a leader, you think you have to be perfect. There's nobody that's perfect. And so if you did do something that wasn't smart or was a mistake, admit it and ask for forgiveness. Your team, when the more vulnerable you are, the more welcoming your team will feel. And that feels counterintuitive, but of course, if you only make mistakes and you never have anything good, that's probably not a good recipe for success either. But being humble and admitting when you need to do something differently is a good quality to have in a leader.
Do you recommend, this is a bit tactical, but do you recommend when you have one-on-ones that you ask for feedback in terms of like, hey, what could I be doing better? What are the things? And what is like the best piece of feedback you've gotten when you've asked that question?
I was just talking to one of my teammates yesterday, and she was talking about how she wished her mom passed a year ago, or a couple of years ago, and she said, the thing, Maynard, you always do in every one-on-one is you end it with, what advice do you have for me? And I wish I had asked my mom that. So her aunt is dying, and she asked her that question, and she got back feedback that she'll remember for the rest of her life.
Wow.
So I think it's really important. So I ask for advice all the time, and I get most of it from my wife, and so it's constant and always there. But I'd say the best advice I ever got was I went to see Mitch Kapoor, and it changed my life because I was in a mode of having to join companies or joining teams, and he said, Maynard, you're successful enough, you don't have to join anything anymore. You get to decide who joins you. And the next day I created the Webb Investment Network. And that was 9 or 10 years ago, and it's been the most fun journey in my life. And I don't think he was telling me to do Webb Investment Network. He just said, your model is wrong. You think you have to join all these other folks. You get to decide what you want to do.
Oh, it's great advice.
Yeah, it was good. It's good advice.
At the, kind of just switching a little bit to hiring, right? Because at the earliest stages where startups are, like, the CEO has the vision, they may have VCs who believe in them, they may be, bootstrapping, they need to convince a lot of people on their vision.
No, you don't need to convince a lot of people, you need to convince a few people. Not
Fair point.
40,000 like
Yeah.
you're trying to hire at Salesforce.
So how do you convince, like, what do you see as, like, as you invest in the earliest stages, right? You invest seed. What have you seen, like, of the founders who are great at building the teams that they need to grow?
I think it's an attitude that's incorrect about hiring.
Okay.
About how hard it is. I agree that it's hard, but if you have the mindset that something's hard and distasteful and you don't spend time building a competency in it, it's not going to help you.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're going to have to do all the way up the ladder is learn how to hire and recruit and retain and motivate. And so the faster you are able to figure that out, the better you'll be. And I try to think about it not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense. So I'm a big football fan, and I can promise you that if I have 2 tickets to the Super Bowl, I can find people who want to go to the Super Bowl with me. And so my job as a hiring manager or a leader in a startup is convince my recruits that this company is so awesome and so special that it's like going to the Super Bowl. And so there's only a few people that are going to be founders with you or that are on your team in the early days. And hopefully you're going to give them the ride of their lives, and you might not be able to pay them as well as a Google or Facebook or Salesforce, but they won't be able to influence the company and those companies the same way they'll be able to as an early member of your team. And so you also, if you're successful, will return way more than they could make. They can make a good living anywhere, but they can change the trajectory of their families' lives for generations with you.
Yeah.
And that's what you've got to be selling and believing and doing. And if you do that, you'll find that recruiting gets easier and easier.
Given that we're moving at that speed, right? Like startups are moving, everyone's saying like, hey, between now and 2 months from now, your team should have doubled. How do you?
Maybe if you're actually growing.
Depends where. Yeah, if
like
you're growing.
If it's doubling
right?
and you're not growing,
absolutely.
That's a recipe for a little bit of trouble.
How do you, in that environment where you're moving fast, hopefully things are going well, how do you avoid making mistakes? And as you look back, you've hired thousands of people. What did you look for in the people that worked out? And when have you made mistakes? And what are the common traits there?
I've probably made more than my share of mistakes. It's hard to be perfect on every hire. I also used to try to make sure when I recruited people, they could bring way more people. That was a good indication to me that they had a network and that they had people they liked. I now worry about that advice because then you can get a culture that looks too insular, which is not good. But I would always try to find, it was great if I had worked with them before, that at least I knew them, but that wasn't always a recipe for success in a new company.
Right.
But your network is only so big on that. But I tried to find people who were part of a build, did something that you could go back and check and see, and that they had hurdles and they had obstacles. When I meet with founders now, I always want to know about their life story and what they faced and what didn't go so well and how did they get over that, because companies and careers are filled with obstacles and you want people that are resilient. And so I always tried to look for resilience. I also tried to hire for people that could scale, meaning if we were in a fast growth company, it's a promotion just to stay in the same job you're in. So how do I make sure that whoever I hired could scale to the next level and then beyond? Where I made some of my bigger mistakes, I was always, and my ego would get involved in this, but I would surprise myself that I was able to get people to come work with me on projects or teams. And so like one time when I was at Live Ops, I was able to hire the CEO of the industry leader to come be my head of sales. And I was like, how did I do that? That's so cool. But he didn't want to really work anymore. So that was not a good thing, or didn't want to work with me. So I did that once at eBay where Meg was terrified that I'd get hit by a bus and I needed to hire my replacement. And we got world-class person, and he came in and his whole bent was work-life balance, if you remember. And that didn't last that long, and because we were still growing like crazy and it was hard and all that good stuff. So where I've made my mistakes often is hiring people that could do the job but may not want to do today's job. I've found better success in promoting people like you, Shri, and others that were doing the job well and giving you more. And, so I think it's a combo of doing both of those.
Yep. Wow, you just answered like 4 questions with that one answer.
Sorry.
That's okay, that's all good. How do you, so when you're doing that, right, when you're growing a team, and I think there are several companies here that are, but they haven't necessarily done that next step is a big job, and they haven't done that, or they haven't managed people, whatever that thing is. How do you develop them so that they're able to do that well, and the people under them or the company doesn't suffer because of their lack of knowing how to do that?
I think the best thing to do is to find the whole learning thing. If people are willing to learn and grow, then go find mentors out in the world that are doing it well and connect them. And by the way, if they're not doing that on their own, that's a little bit troubling, because if somebody thinks, oh, I have this problem, I think I can do almost anything, and I'll jump in, and it's like, oh, maybe I should go ask somebody that's done this before, which I'm more than willing to do. But I would say give your best people have more ability to do things than you might think. And I used to say, give your busiest people more work because they'll get it done. And usually they will, but you don't want to leave them and put them in a hospital or have them, jump off buildings and things like that. But there's more potential in all of us. And the one thing that's true on potential is when you tap it, it grows. It's not like a budget. There's only so many dollars, and some people can stretch a budget further. But on potential, the more you learn, the more you try, the more capability you have. So I'd be working on my best people to let them know that they're expected to do more and to grow, and that I realize that they may make a mistake or two, but that in general, and they should go find people who are rock stars in the industry. If you remember when we would talk, everybody always thinks they're world class. You go ask everybody in the room, are you a good driver? Everybody thinks you're a good driver, right? But most of us are not. I was on 101 this morning, I can promise you that. So go learn from the best. And my teams would always say, yeah, we're world class. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, go find out what that means. What does that look like? And they'd come back and they'd be like, oh, well, we have some work to do. We're a work in progress. Okay, cool. So just keep helping paint the vision. I also think there's a really important thing for you to collaborate. By the way, when you're a CEO, you don't know everything either. You're still learning, and there are things that you haven't done yet or seen yet that other people have, and so you should be getting that learning and that coaching from other people as well.
And what's the opposite of that is when you have a team that's growing really fast and you don't see in a certain section of the organization, you don't see someone who can scale, and you bring someone in over them. How do you keep, these are the people who took the bet on you, with you, at the earliest stages. How do you keep them motivated when you're, essentially layering them?
I think this goes to communication, and frankly, I always tell my teams it's just math, because there's always a lot of, and I just told you that a couple of times I've made a bad mistake in layering somebody. But you can't get to where you're going with the same team members you have if you're going to be super successful. If you're 10 people today and you're 100 people a year from now, you can't promote your way to that. You might be able to promote some of them, all the way, and it's always awesome to see people climb all the way and do that. That's awesome, but the math doesn't work. When you get to be 100, when you get to be 1,000, you're going to have to get good at recruiting and bringing people in to help you on the journey. And what you have to do is make sure you don't do the us versus them. Like I see this a lot where the founding engineering teams are really tight, and then you bring the first salesperson in and they hate them. I was like, well, no, we're going to have to talk to customers to get some at some point. And, we need to make sure that they know how to sell the product. And, so I think you have to be painting the picture for your teams about what success looks like and how it's going to be on that journey. I remember my first day on the job at eBay, the engineers that were there are like, we hate how big we're getting. And we were very small. And I was like, well, you know what? We're not going back to being 3 engineers because you would really hate your stock price if we did that. So now we have to figure out how we're going to get big and stay small. So a lot of what you have to do is frame and listen, but paint a picture of where you're going and then, deliver that.
Yeah. And at the earliest stages, how should you be working with your investor? So you invest seed, pre-seed, you invest in people you've worked with before, very early. And what have you seen where you're like, okay, this person is actually using me really well, or using their investors and their board really well?
Well, first, I try not, I don't do, I've been lucky enough to be on plenty of boards, and I don't want to be on anybody's board anymore. I don't mean that, not in the right way, but so what I want is...
Did Yahoo change that for you?
Whew, yes, that was, yes. And I would just say that for me, I'm trying to invest not only in the idea and the founder, but people that want the help. Because if you don't want our help, I don't find it as satisfying. I don't want to tell you what to do. I want you to run your show, but we really mean it when we say we want to help. And so it's satisfying to me when we get people that ask for that help. So we're investors in GOAT. And John Donahoe, I don't know if you guys know it, it's one of the leading sneaker marketplaces out there. And John Donahoe, who used to be at eBay, just was named CEO at Nike on Tuesday. The CEO of GOAT's like, Maynard, do you know John? Yes, I helped hire him. And can you get me to him? I said, yes, but we probably need to let him settle in. He doesn't start there until January, but like maybe in February, give me something and I'll make sure he gets it and we'll go. And then I feel like I helped him, so.
As you think about, you fixed eBay, right? Like the site was going down daily, ops, the enterprise side,
Yeah, investing is a lot more fun than that.
Yeah, but so you invest a lot in what you know.
Yes.
So how involved should an investor be in helping? And is there a line that you don't cross?
Well, that's, so as a CEO, I would say most people don't ask their boards for enough help. And we always encourage, but I encourage CEOs to take control of that. You have plenty of board members that want to give you help on what they think you should be doing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having you put your board to work to help you achieve your goals. So we try to get our companies to write like a monthly update and say, what do they need and what's the progress and who has helped them the most. The VCs are all very competitive, and the investors, and seeing your name, I actually get my team a hard time if their name's not on the list of things that they've done to help. And so it just changes the dynamic. I also think at the very early stages, you should avoid a formal board if you can. There's no reason at the seed stage that you need a board member. But you can be working with them in a pseudo board-like context so that you build the muscle of what it's like to run a board meeting and get the advice and not give them the power and the hammer of what you'll get at by the time your Series A is I don't think you'll be able to avoid a board member officially.
Yeah.
Maybe, but so.
Yeah, I want to agree with that. I actually think CEOs do not ask enough for what they should be doing. You actually need to know who your investor is really well, like in terms of who they're connected to, who they know, what their background is, and you need to ask them to work for you. And all of them should be working for you because there's a lot of money right now. That may not always be the case in the future, but there's a lot of money right now. So money is not a differentiator. It should really be like, what can they do for you? And are they going to get in there and help you, not just with strategy, but with introductions, with helping you think through hiring, with helping you actually find people to hire. All of those things, they have the connections that you may not yet have. And so they should absolutely be working for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. I'm going to talk.
The one thing I would just say to the CEOs is you're playing multidimensional chess. You have to manage your customers, you have to manage your board, you have to manage your employees, and they're all a little different with how you have to handle all that. So you have to pay attention to all three and know how it's done. One of my CEOs came to me and says, I hate my board meetings. I'm like, oh, good. And why? And well, I don't really like to go to them, and I don't like to prepare for them, and I don't like to do that. It's like, well, and you're being very successful, but how's that working for you? Like, and how do you think it feels for them? Do I have time to tell another
Yeah, of
story?
course. We have lots of time.
And then one of our breakout companies called me a few years ago, and he said, my board's driving me crazy. I said, okay, why? He goes, well, the site crashed on our busiest day on January 1st, and they're mad about that because we lost over $1 million in revenue. And he goes, and they're micromanaging me, and I don't like it. I'm like, well, did you tell the board anything about that? He goes, no, not their job. I said, let me give you a little coaching, it is their job to know what's going on, and if there's a big issue, to help it. And by the way, but it's your job to guide them and tell them and not freak them out, about it, and make sure they can get guidance. And I ended up having to get on the phone with he and his tech person, and then with his board, and trying to shape that. But like just perceptions of what you should say and what you shouldn't do, and the more truthful you are, the better it is.
Yeah.
But without freaking them out. Like they will, if they think that the job's not being done, they will do their part to make sure the job's being done. But it's a fine balance.
How do you think about CEO transparency across all the constituents? So, we know a CEO, Andre, who, we're both lucky to be investors in him. We worked with him before. He's the CEO of Turo. He spoke here last year, who has a very radical transparency approach. He has a board deck that he shares with the board members. The board members all have a full login to the full dashboard. So if they so choose, they can be on it 24/7 looking at revenue coming in. Hopefully none of them are doing that, but they could do that. The other thing he does is the entire company, and now I think he's well over 150 people, has access to the same dashboard. So the customer service person, the board, they all have access to it. He has a board deck that he discusses with the board, and then he has a all hands where he shares the exact same deck, nothing redacted, with the entire company.
I love that.
Yeah. So
I mean, Mark Benioff has always blown me away where we'll do the kickoff and he'll broadcast it to every employee, and we cover a lot of stuff, and he invites the board members. And by the way, he gets mad if you're not there. And it's like, well, I'm not trying to walk the line between board and management, but he's much more willing to do that, and I think it makes even more powerful. But you also have to be watching. You have to train people on that kind of transparency so they don't freak out if they see something that starts to go wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to put it in context, but I think that's awesome.
So how do you do that, right? So when things are going great, that seems like an amazing model to follow. Hey, it's all up and to the right, right? Like I'll share everything. But every every single person here has been on a roller coaster, right? Whether you think others have or not, they all have. Right?
I think you
so
have.
how do you share it and when you're 150 people, how do you tell the customer service person, you should not be looking for a job, this is not what it means, but we're sharing all this information.
You have to put it in context. And you have to say from the beginning that there'll be times that the information is wonderful and times that it's not, and here's why you shouldn't freak about times that it's not, and give them something to anchor on for the future. And then, but they'll ask to see the progress on that. So I think it's better to be transparent than not, but you're gonna have to train people on how to deal with that because you might have somebody overreact.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, everyone here has fundraised and will likely fundraise again. What's your best advice? If you could, and 3 things that you'd say.
I think it's so counterintuitive to fundraise. Like we get involved in the very early stages, and often there's a super hot deal because of the team and their background that hasn't built a thing, right? That it's just on paper.
Yep.
And yet they're able to get great terms and great investors. And I have to tell you, I don't like that much. And then a team actually gets started and they are taking long. Most times it takes longer than you think it will. And they're struggling to actually do it. And then they go to fundraise and people are nitpicking everything that's there. But they built something. And it's not quite perfect yet, but actually they've done something. And so don't get discouraged is what I guess I would say. You're either, I think it's bimodal. You either have something that everybody wants and is always growing and you can close around in a week. I hope that's where your company is, but that's not. What percent of companies do you think that is? Maybe 10?
10, 5 to 10.
Yeah, not many, and God bless them if you're one of those. One of my biggest wins is AppLovin, which is doing well, and he couldn't raise a round. And I'm very pleased because I was one of the early angel investors, and there's never been more money, and so my ownership has not been diluted down the way it normally is, and he's on fire, and he never had to go raise another round, and that was awesome because he was profitable from the early days. But most of us have to go get money, might not have as pretty a picture as we'd like, and you just have to realize that it might be a little more tough sledding. But people that say they hate to do fundraising, it's just like hiring, right? It's the same thing. You might as well build the muscle because you're gonna be doing it all the way through the life cycle of your company. And when you go public, you're gonna be doing it with public investors as well, so.
So what have you seen founders do really well in fundraising, and what have you seen people do poorly?
Well, the thing that is a recipe for a lot of angst for the CEO is when you oversell, when you get overly optimistic in your forecast as you're going to get investors, and having that first board meeting and you've got a big reset, because I told you I was going to grow at 30%, quarter over quarter, and I grew at 10. And that person is usually not very happy because he just sold his or her whole partnership on the future and paid you for that, the belief in your growth. And I've been in a few of those board meetings where that happened. It isn't very, very pretty. So that's one big mistake. Now you have to have enough optimism to get money. So I know it's a fine balance, but you want to be credible to that whole park bench thing.
Yeah.
That behavior doesn't land you on the park bench with your investor very well.
Right.
For sure. And then, I think the best fundraisers are always ahead of, they don't have to do a formal round, right? Yeah. Because people are coming to see them and hear the story and begging them to get in, and so making sure people understand your story as you're going through it and maybe understanding who you most want to build a relationship with before you're asking for money. So getting to know the investors you most want to have on your cap table or have by your side before you're asking for money is a piece of advice I'd have.
Yep. So one of the things I actually wrote a very short blog post about this is when you look at every other CEO, their trajectory or company, it looks like the trajectory is up and to the right, right? And then you really zoom in, and it's pretty much this, right? And so as someone who's invested in and been in companies that have been on that roller coaster, I'd love for you to just share a couple of stories of companies that are now perhaps public or Series E, F, whatever, and are doing really well that you've actually seen go through that, and just share like what those bumps have been and how they got through them and how they got to where they are today.
Well, and by the way, after you're public, you still have phases. Everything hasn't been up and to the right for Salesforce. It looks that way, but there are times that you go through dislocations. Okta is a fabulous success story for us. Well, I was invested in it back in '09, the earliest investor, and then Wynn came in 2010 or 2011. But there was a while that, and the COO came and spoke at our go-to-market just last week, and he talked about 2 times the board asked him to leave the room in the boardroom because he hadn't quite found, they were burning cash too much, and they hadn't quite found the scalability. A lot of times, people get, in my book I talk about going from idea to relevance, which you can think of as product market fit, and then people get stuck there, or they start finding early product market fit, and they can't get through to scale. And how do you go from product market fit to scalability? And they were stuck a little bit, but they found their way through it, and then it took off, and it's like amazing now.
Yeah.
But they have a whole set of new challenges, right? They're a public company, and they get reviewed every quarter, and they have to keep motivating their employees, and so it's always hard work.
Got it. So I have
But
a lot
it's more fun when the wind's at your back, is what I would say, than
For sure.
when it's not.
So I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to open it up to everyone here so that you can ask some questions. And
you talked about trust. You did so very much on a personal level. Getting employees to not just trust you, but to trust the organization is different. How do you think about getting an organization, getting employees to trust the organization?
I think it's crucial. I mean, Mark will say at Salesforce, our number one value is our trust. Our customers have to trust us. Our employees have to trust us. And if we're breaking that trust, we need to make it better. I mean, you won't get anything done at the level you expect to if people are worried that they're not going to be treated well or fairly or whatever. And every day you'll get a new chance to, build. I tell people you're building credibility or you're losing credibility every day. That's not just personally, but the company is. And if you have a bad quarter and you miss the quarter and the stock price is down, that's going to, no matter what else is going well, people are going to feel that. And you have to make sure they know that it's not a great day, but there are better days ahead. So I think a lot of times people try to hide from some of those things instead of putting them in context and try to paint the vision of where things are going. But you can't just think about that CEO that oversold his company and the investor. If you do that with your employees and say, oh, that's just a momentary blip and the stock will be back, you can't control where the stock is going to be. What you can control is how your company performs and what are you shooting for, right? And when you have days, and you will have them, where it doesn't go the way you had hoped, you have to talk about why, and then what did we learn, and then what are we going to do differently going forward.
one thing that I just add to that is,
Great question.
an organization is all the people in it. And so I think, if you're thinking about it from an external perspective, it's like there has to be a culture and a way that people believe that the organization presents itself, because what is the organization presenting itself? It's every person and every interaction that they have, either with each other or externally. And I think knowing what you stand for, what you can do, what you won't do, the lines you'll cross, basically all of those things that make up culture, right, really determines what your organization is. So there's a question here.
Yeah, the point you just made about credibility actually sort of inspired this question. So I know there are obviously metrics and KPIs and so forth that we all track from a company standpoint, but I was curious if there were any personal metrics that you almost like, maybe I'm too much of a spreadsheet junkie, but that you tracked, you know, quarter on quarter about yourself and how you were doing over time.
You would, yes. And I already have my 2020 goals all spelled out on. I have blended, I live in this weird space where I have my family and my life and my work, and they're all together. And so I track goals on every one of those dimensions. And the one that I unfortunately don't make as much progress on is my health is fine, but my weight is not. So that's my constant one that every year I kind of screw up a little bit on, although I'm progress. But most of the others, I like I like to set ambitious goals, and I want to make them, and I track it all the way through, and drives my wife crazy. I once told her this was a bad idea early in our marriage. I once told her that maybe we should have a formal performance review every quarter, and she didn't think that was a good idea at all.
We'll go here and then Ivana, and then back there.
How do you think about the right goals to set quarter, year, 2 years? Do you reset them all the time? I mean, obviously personally, but also as a company.
Yeah, I try not to. I try to have them be good enough that they don't need to be reset all the time, but it is an art. And what worked for me is I've had to learn, and this sounds too egotistical, and I don't mean it this way, but what I think is great is not always what the team thinks they could do. So if I come out with what I think is a bold goal, I will leave people in a puddle, especially if I ask them to do it in the next quarter. They won't, they don't think that's possible. And what I've found, though, is if you give them 9 months, they commit to stuff they shouldn't, that you know they can't get done. So I try to find a way to get something that I think doesn't suck, but I'd be happy with, and that they think is hard, but they